Drums. Big, fat sounding drums. Rock and roll. That's what we're gonna talk about today. I'm gonna show you how to mix some great sounding but also organic sounding drums. And we're using a lot of very sexy ribbon microphones for that. So that's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm gonna show you how to make the same drum performance sound everything from tight and in your face to roomy and huge. And everything in between. Sounds like this. But as I said, the same drum performance can sound very different depending on how we mix it. And by the way, we're not using reverb here. No digital reverb at all. It's just the microphones mixed differently. So that was a middle of the road example. And now we're going from something very tight in your face to something very roomy. Enjoy. Before I walk you through the mix in Cubase and show you how I get the sound for the different examples, let me give you some background information about organic and good sounding drums, how to record them. I want to let you know what's important and what's not. So there are mainly 4 different components that matter. And we start right at the beginning of the signal chain. So what's the first piece of that chain? Yeah, that's the drummer. And if you want to make your drum sound a lot better, get a better drummer. Or let's say a better sounding drummer. Because it's not really about having someone who plays technically perfect, not even about the timing. The question is if a drummer sounds good or not. If he makes the drum kit sing, shine, you know. If he has the right balance or not. When I record a drummer, when I pull up the first fader, mostly the overhead fader, usually after 10 seconds I can tell how he will sound. So yeah, getting a good drummer is the easiest way to make your drum sound better. But I know that's not always possible. But you should be able to guide the drummer, to give him the guidance he needs, because sometimes that can really help him to sound better. For examples, many of them are hitting the cymbals too hard and the drums too softly. And yeah, you let them know what they are doing wrong. Some of them can actually adapt during the session. Or you might tell them to concentrate on hitting the snare right in the middle where it sounds great, instead of doing the bing bang bong bong thing, you know. So if they know what they have to concentrate on, they will play a lot better. So that's the first thing. Anything that happens before the microphone, if you improve that, that is more effective than changing anything later. Today we have my dear friend Thomas Teufel on the drums. He plays in a band called the Alligator Wine, which is nothing but lovely. Check them out. There's a link below. The Alligator Wine. Vintage rock band. Amazing. We're working on their second album right now. The second thing is the drum kit. And the drum kit is actually less important than you might think. I've done a lot of great recordings with, let's call them mid-priced drum kits. This one is really expensive though. It's a Yamaha Maple Custom. I think they don't make it anymore, but it used to be their most expensive drum kit. And by the way, I don't believe in the myth that you need to have birch kits for rock and roll. We also have a Yamaha what's it called? Recording custom, like the standard for the studio, a birch kit. And I only use the kick, but I don't use the rest really. I prefer my maple kit. So what's important? First of all, the most important part is the tuning. I cannot explain the tuning in this video. That will be a different video. I have already done a snare tuning video. Here's a link. Watch it later. But if you tune your drums right, and if you have the right tuning for the genre you are playing, that is so helpful and much more important than having an expensive drum kit. By the way, if you choose a drum kit, if you buy a drum kit, same with the snare, try to find something that sounds resonant. Compare different shells and try to find something that sounds resonant. Even in this kit here, I'm using a 12-inch tom, and it sounds great, no matter how I tune it, more or less. It's the dimensions, it's the wood, I don't know. It just sounds great. I also have the 13-inch version from the same series, and that one is way harder to tune. And when it is tuned perfectly, it also sounds great, but I prefer the 12-inch version a lot more. I'm pretty sure it's the dimensions. So what you can take away is you can get a great drum sound also with cheaper gear if you choose the right gear and if you know how to tune it well. Same with microphones. We're not using super expensive microphones in this example, and we're not using many microphones in this example. So these days, there are many affordable drum microphones that sound great. Again, if you have a good drummer and you have a well-tuned drum kit that works for this kind of music, you will get away even with cheaper microphones. I might do another video on cheap microphones. Anybody interested? Let me know. Thank you. Drummer, drum kit, microphones. Number 4. And that is very, very important. The room you're recording in. And I have to tell you, the more room, the better your drum kit will sound, more or less. I mean, you can get away with recording in a tiny room with a lot of absorption if you want to sample replace everything later anyway and add room samples and stuff like that. Yeah, that works. But if you want to have an organic, roomy sound, you need a good sounding room. I'm not talking about a super professional measured room like mine. People record drums in swimming pools, you know. That is not ideal, but it sounds great. A swimming pool has a lot of early reflections. A swimming pool has a lot of flutter echoes, a lot of higher frequencies. Not ideal, but it sounds great on drums. What I'm saying is, if you have the chance to find a room that is bigger, grab your laptop, grab your recording gear and move there. It will pay out in the end because you can play a lot with different distant microphones, overheads and room microphones, and it will give your recording more character than being in a tiny room. Rip off the absorbent material. You know, in so many rehearsals rooms, I see carpets and shit everywhere that take away all the higher frequencies. You want a room to breathe. You want reflections. That's what makes a drum session, a drum recording, interesting. And one more thing that makes a good sounding room so precious, and that is the more useful room or overhead microphone information you can record, the less you need to rely on your closed microphones. The closed mics are important. They are important for the punch, but they don't actually sound good most of the time. They don't sound natural. You don't have your ear 2 centimeters above a snare head. No, you don't do that. Closed microphones very often sound like boom, boom, boom. So they have a lot of low end, they have a lot of punch, that is right, but to make them sound naturally, you need to crank the highs, you need to do a lot of EQing, but we need to get close with the microphone to avoid the bleed from the other instruments. So it's a compromise. But it is the overhead microphones and the room microphones, the distant microphones, that give the drums its actual tone, its body. And in combination with the closed mics, you have the punch of the closed mics and the actual tone of the drums coming from the distant microphones. So again, a good sounding room will give you more options, more perspectives to capture the tone of your drum kit and of your drum performance. And that's what I'm doing in this video. I'm using ribbon mics for this. Why am I using ribbon mics? I have 3 pairs of ribbon mics here. I will go to my live room very soon and show you exactly where they are before we listen. So why am I using ribbon microphones? Well, they just work on drums for several reasons. It's also a matter of taste. So I don't like most of those small pencil condensers. To me, they sound a little too fast and a little too bright and a little too thin and a little too precise and a little annoying. Ribbon mics are more forgiving, but fast enough still for drums. Ribbon mics traditionally have a full-bodied sound that is slightly darker. But modern ribbon mics that we are using here actually have enough of high end. So it doesn't sound too vintage. And ribbon mics have a certain quality that it just sounds very natural, like you are in the room. And that is a quality that is very important for recording drums. So, finally, I almost forgot that, figure of 8 pattern. So they will also give you a lot of nice room information. So, ribbon mics sound natural. They sound fat and punchy. They don't sound too clinical and too precise. That's why I love them on drums. And here we have 3 stereo sets of ribbon mics. One overhead setting, one close room overhead, whatever kit setting, and one distant room setting. Let me go down to my live room and show you the setup. Welcome to my live room. Let's have a look at the microphone setup. So let's start with the main overheads. Here's one and there's another one. These are Rode ribbon microphones. And you can see that like the main axis in between them goes here. So I got the snare and more or less the kick in the middle in the stereo center. And you see one cymbal will be on this side, the other cymbal will be on that side. This tom will be on this side, this tom will be on that side. Hi-hat over here. So that means we will have a pretty good stereo image of the drums. And being figure of 8 pattern ribbon microphones, they will pick up quite a bit of the room, but they are still pretty close to the kit, so we should have a pretty balanced mix of the direct signal and the room. So that's my main setup, and then we can add the closed microphones. So the next setup that's gonna sound a little more intimate and a little tighter is this one here. And here I have a pair of NoHype ribbons. And they are quite a bit closer, but you can see they're more or less in the same axis. Like cymbals left, right, toms left, right, kick and snare in the middle. Because they are closer, they will sound tighter, but also because they are above the kick drum. And in this position, the kick drum is not gonna have a lot of bass here. It's gonna sound tight and a little thin maybe, but you know, that's what we want. Same thing for the snare, because they're facing the side of the snare, which means from the side of the snare, there's not a lot of low end coming. It's more like the highs that are coming from the shell. So this one's gonna sound thinner and tighter, but yeah, you know, we want some alternatives. We want some different perspectives. And let's have a look at the other microphones. So here you can see, I also had a lo-fi microphone here and a kick microphone there. And behind the first gobo, we have my second kick microphone. This is an SE Electronics R&T tube microphone. Here's the Ludwig snare that we also used on this recording. Excuse the mess. This is, looks terrible right now. Okay, and behind the second gobo, you know, drums over here, we have my third pair of ribbon microphones. And this is a pair of SE Electronic Voodoos, also great sounding. They're actually the brightest of the bunch. Anyway, they are in a bloom line setup and they're behind the gobo, so they're not gonna pick up a lot of direct signal, but they will pick up a lot more bouncing back from everywhere in the room. So they're gonna sound darker, they're gonna sound more distant, more roomy, and will give us a very, very different view, perspective, picture of the drum kit. All right, so we got this one, this is the room setup, and we've got 2 setups here. The main overheads, now you can see them from this side, and let's call them the tight overheads. Let's see what we can do with them. We're back in the control room. Let's have a look at the tracks. So here you can see my 3 stereo tracks, the 3 stereo ribbon pairs. The red one, that is the normal overhead setup. Here we have the room, far room, and here we have the more intimate sounding, the closer microphones. The idea is to combine each of those stereo files with the closed microphones, kick, snare, toms, to achieve 3 different drum sounds here from the same performance. We start with the normal overheads. No processing, by the way, at all. So on any of the tracks. And it sounds like this. So that just sounds very good and very balanced. Why is that? First of all, we're using the Rode ribbon microphones, and they are like the modern type of ribbon microphones. So they have all the advantages of ribbons. They sound full and natural, but they have an extended top. So they will just sound a little more modern. They will give you a little more modern image, especially of the cymbals, but will also have a little more attack, a little more snap in the drums. That sounds very nice. I've shown you the position, so that is very important. I had this axis, so I made sure by having each microphone on one side of that axis that every drum and every cymbal is where I wanted in the stereo image. I made sure the snare has the same distance to each microphone. Same for the kick, more or less. It's not that important to have the kick in the middle on your overheads if you use a closed kick mic. And I have fine-tuned the height of the microphones to get the right balance between the room and the direct signal. That sounds very nice here. You can hear the room, but it's not too much. It's still very detailed. You can hear the character of the cymbals and the drums, but you can hear, hey, it's happening in a nice room. And by moving the microphones, you can fine-tune the balance between the different instruments. So I usually fine-tune them until I think I have found a good overhead balance where I can hear the whole kit in favor of the cymbals. So let me add the closed microphones. Let me show you what they sound like. So this is our snare. Very nice sounding snare, really ringy and open sounding, really nice. And it has enough punch, because that's the function, like I told you, of the closed mics, to give us not a natural sound, but the punch, the low end of the snare, or of any drum. Let's have a listen to the kick drum. Sounds like this. I think I have, yeah, here I have an EQ, like carving out a little 300 hertz. Let's just turn it off. Not really doing a lot. So snare is completely unprocessed. Let's start with the overheads, and then we will add the closed mics. And that sounds wonderful, right? Because we made no mistakes so far, you know? Drummer is good, drum kit sounds nice, it's tuned well enough, we used the right microphones in a good sounding room. So there's not a lot of character in this version right now, but it just sounds clean and nice. And you can now continue with recording other instruments. And later, typically, you need to carve out some lower mids to make some space for the other instruments and to take out some energy down there. Maybe add some highs to those tracks so the drums get a little more bite and a little more snap. But for now, this just sounds great. Maybe let's just add the toms as well. If you do your homework, you don't need a lot of processing. Let's move on to the next pair. Let's turn off the closed mics again. Let's have a listen to the room track. Sounds like this. Also very nice. I mean, more roomy, of course, and less detailed. I can hear something around 3K. That sounds a little annoying. Let me just take that out. So you can hear this sounds a lot more roomy, you have less details, and you have less or actually no real useful stereo information anymore. Let's have a listen. I'm a stereo room guy. I don't like mono room mics. I just don't like them. I know other people love them. I just don't like them. They kind of sound a little unnatural to me. And you know, one argument is if you record room in stereo, you can still turn it to a mono. You have two mono mics, you know, but you can't do it the other way around. I prefer, if I can, to use a stereo setup. Okay, so what do we need to do here? If this is our only microphone, we need compression. Why do we need compression? First of all, because compression makes drums, and especially room tracks, sound very sexy. That's one thing. The other thing is it will bring up all the details that might be a little covered or a little cloudy. So let's use some compression. And I want to use the most extreme compression out there. I'm using the talkback limiter from Cornef, which is a plug-in version of the famous SSL Listen Mic compressor, which is one of the most extreme compressors out there. You don't have to do much. You just, you know, just crank it a little. I always want to make sure like the needle goes back to 0 on the silent hits. Yeah, 20 dB of compression. Okay, that sounds great, but too much like an effect. So I will mix in, let's say 50% of the dry signal. So that gives the room track a lot more mojo, but it doesn't sound like an effect. And it brings up all the, let's call it background information, so to say. What I'm using here, these are the SE Electronics Voodoo ribbons. I think they're the cheapest of the bunch. Really great sounding. They're pretty cheap. I don't know. I'll put a link to all the microphones in the description. The passive ones. I don't need the active ones. For what? Drums are loud enough. Anyway, I can recommend those because they're pretty cheap and they sound great. And they're actually the brightest of the bunch. So they have highs almost like a darker sounding condenser. So they're very useful. I also use them as overheads all the time. And I use them here behind the gobo because they bring back some of the highs that are gone because the microphones are far away. All right, let's do the same thing again. Let's add the close mics. And that just makes me happy. Again, one stereo pair of fucking ribbons. And then you have the close mics and that's it. And this sounds great. You can hear all the details and it has a lot of punch and still it sounds roomy and has character, has a story to tell. So let's compare this to the version we had before, to the overheads version. Room first. So very different, right? So different, same performance, totally different perspective, but equally cool. Let's go back. Just imagine having one sound in the verse and then opening up the chorus by adding the room microphones. You can also mix them, of course. That just makes things sound interesting. And it's so simple, you see? It's so simple. Now we have two options. Now it depends on the arrangement and how we want the song to sound. But let's talk about the third option we have. Maybe we want the arrangement to be a little more intimate. And this is where the two mics in front of the kick come into play. And they sound like this. So they sound intimate, a lot more mono, you have a lot more highs, and you have a lot more details, but you don't have the boom of the other microphones because they're so close. I think they sound a little bright, so let me just EQ them a little bit to make them sound a little smoother. So I'm removing the highest highs here. I don't like them. And this cymbal sounds a little annoying. I showed you down there, right? Better like this. Maybe add a low cut. Now that's a lot nicer, you know, it's not much, but I'm adding a little boom down there, taking out the lowest rumble, taking out some boxiness here and trying to make the cymbal sound a lot less aggressive here, and also removing the highest highs. It might be an option to add Soothe here, one of the greatest plugin invention of the last years. So this is removing all the nasty resonances up there, so it just makes things sound a little smoother. Again, now I like this. I don't want compression here, because it will bring up too much of the room. I want this to be as close sounding as possible. One thing I want to do is, I want to make this more mono. To stereo, let's go to, let's say, 80%. More or less. Let's go. That's tight and bright, like very different from the other two. I like it. So let's add the close mics, and I think we will need less of the close mics because I can already hear the drums pretty well. I don't think we need the toms at all, because listen. Toms sound great. Just on those ribbon tracks. Let's add the kick. And the snare. Awesome, awesome, I love this. So nice. So you see, I'm switching just between those three stereo pairs without any fine-tuning of the close mics. And you can see, yeah, I'm painting three pictures. Beautiful pictures, from close to roomy to something in between. Let's have another listen. Alright, that's all I want to show you today. So I've told you about those 4 steps. Make sure you have a good sounding drummer. That really helps. You can hear it here. Make sure you have a good sounding drum kit. Doesn't have to be super expensive, but it should be well tuned and the tuning should be right for whatever style you are playing. Make sure you have an interesting sounding room. Doesn't need to be a professional room, but it should be an interesting sounding room. Nothing boring. And the fourth thing that was before, make sure you have some good sounding mics. But again, you see it here. All those ribbon mics are not very expensive. And the rest are just some dynamic mics. I'll put a list of all the microphones used in the description. But you can see a stereo pair of SE Electronic ribbons is not expensive. Then you add 2 dynamic mics for your kick and your snare, and maybe 2 more for your toms, and that's it. The next thing you want to do, you want to experiment with the room. I know my room pretty well. I've done a lot of sessions in there, so I know where to put the room microphones. I know where to put them. I still need to experiment a little, but most of the time I'm damn close. So you want to experiment, and you might find some weird positions in your room that sound great, or you might just find some positions that are very different from mine, but work great in your room. Do some experiments, and once you know your room well enough, you can have a setup like this, where you have 3 drum sounds and you can switch between them with just 1 click. Fun, right? Really cool. Boys and girls, are you interested in getting those drum tracks? You know, just to have some fun with them, just to experiment with them, just to, you know, whatever. I will send you those drum tracks, the multi-tracks, next week. All you have to do is subscribe to my email list. You'll find a link below. Please subscribe. I will send you the drum tracks and you can have a lot of fun with them. All right, that's one thing. I will also put a lot of links below to all the gear that I used in this example. I will put a link to the Alligator Wine, a great vintage rock band. By the way, they have no guitars. It's just 2 guys, drums, they're both singing, and a Moog bass and a distorted organ. Very interesting music. Check out the Alligator Wine. What else? Yeah, check out my socials. You will find them here. Just have a look at the description. There's a lot of cool stuff there. I will also put some discounts there. You can get my drum samples there. You can get my IR packs there. All the stuff that will make you happy. Please share this video. Share it on Facebook, share it elsewhere. Tell your friends and grandma that this channel exists. Ring the bell, ding dong, so you don't miss any videos. Now I've said everything, all the stupid stuff you have to say at the end of a video, right? I think so. I love you all. I see you in hell, motherfuckers. Bye-bye.